I'm excited because I think this will post this month in March, which I didn't know was Autism Awareness Month.
It's April.
It's April. What did I say? August?
You said March.
Welcome to Disability Clinic, where all queens are beauty queens. I'm Dr. Van, a Vietnamese woman with long black hair, wearing a dark blazer and blouse, sitting in front of a colorful bookshelf. Our special guest tonight is a filmmaker, disability advocate, and pageant queen, Sarah Pennington. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am Sarah. I am a bald white woman sitting in front of white dresser doors, wearing a coral tank top with a ruffle on it and black glasses.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Super excited.
Just for people who you've never met before, people you're just meeting for the first time, how do you normally like to introduce yourself?
I always say, hi, I'm Sarah, which is a good starter. You always want to start with your name. But it's interesting because when I'm meeting people, especially, you have a lot of conversations, especially in this day and age online. And then, sometimes that moves into a physical space. When people are looking to meet me, I say, look for the bald girl with the service dog and you'll be all set. So that's kind of a unique way that I like to introduce myself.
Oh, yes. And what's your service dog's name?
Her name is Daisy. She's about 40-ish pounds, very dark brown, almost black, and a cutie pie.
I love that I got to introduce you as a pageant queen. Do you just want to talk more about that, since that seems to be a huge part of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got involved with pageantry back in 2016, and it came about because of a friend's recommendation. So I was, at that point in my life, I was very heavily involved with mental health advocacy, and I was doing a lot of things, posting about it and, doing campaigns and all of that jazz. And a friend saw what I was doing, and she was involved in pageants and said, I think you have the perfect platform. You need to compete. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, I love the stage. I love getting dressed up. Why not bring my platform to a larger audience? The caveat being that I had absolutely no idea how that was going to go down, because you don't really see bald women in pageantry. I went in, I shared my story in the interview room, I competed, and then when crowning came around, they called my name as the winner, and I was like, whoa, really? Like, seriously? And so that kind of catapulted me. I got the pageant bug, as they say. 7 years later, I'm still going strong.
That's so exciting. I can't imagine. I mean, I remember watching pageants growing up with my grandma and mom. Like, it's just a really nice parade, and it's amazing how much it's embraced the opportunity to represent a lot of different types of people. It's not just the same, Barbie dolls that we used to see. Do you want to share like part of some of your story and, before the pageant world, it's what brought you here?
So there was like the pre-pageant story, and then there's like the post-pageant story. And so we'll start with the pre. So you get like the basic foundation. The biggest thing that happened was when I was 11, I was diagnosed with trichotillomania. It is hair pulling disorder, which is very similar in form to what most people are familiar with nail biting. And it falls under a category of body-focused repetitive behaviors. And so when I was diagnosed with that when I was 11, I was very lucky to get the diagnosis, because a lot of people kind of go a really long time not even realizing that this is a diagnosable condition. And so that kind of introduced me to the idea that I'll use the word freak, because I think it captures the harshness of being alone in a condition. And so for a few years, it just really didn't bother me. I was blonde and I didn't have eyebrows and eyelashes. And so I kind of just played it off as though they're too light for you to see, even though they actually weren't there. But the issue came in when I started pulling out my head hair, which didn't happen until I was about 13. That was the first time it became physically apparent to others around me that there was something wrong. I did the best that I possibly could to hide this condition from anyone outside of my immediate family. So I started first with styling my hair and combing it over so you couldn't see the bald patches. Then the bald patches grew, so then I started wearing headbands, and then the headbands became thicker and turned into bandanas, hats, and then eventually I ended up wearing wigs for a really long time. And that kind of accumulated until 16, when basically the entire crown of my head was bald. I had horrible depression. I had horrible anxiety. And I was going into a deeper and deeper rabbit hole of just not being okay. I was going to outpatient therapy like 3 times a week at that point. I was dropping out of things that I loved. I wasn't going to school. And I said, okay, this is the point where I'm not happy with my quality of life anymore. I want to get help. So when I was 16, I went into a residential psychiatric treatment program, actually in Wisconsin, which I'm from Pennsylvania, so it's very far away from home, especially for a 16-year-old who's never been that far from home before. And I stayed there for 3 months. And that was a huge turning point for me because I went in going, I was going to stop pulling and I would be done with the hair loss thing and I get my hair back and everything would be okay, which was kind of not the correct way of approaching it. And so when I went in there, they said, that's great and all, but the biggest problem right now is that you're not comfortable in your own skin. So we want you to go hatless, which was probably the most terrifying thing that I had ever considered in my entire life. And so I argued with them for several weeks. And so then we came to a compromise of, okay, you just need to do this for 60 seconds. You can do it when like everyone's working on their schoolwork, so they're not even looking at you. And so I remember the moment I took my hat off and my anxiety was like right up into the sky. And there was no big explosion. Nobody died. It was like, I was waiting for the like, oh my gosh, and it never came. I've been hiding for 5 years and this was it. And then eventually I stepped outside of the comfort of the psychiatric hospital bubble and took my hat off for the first time when we went to a field trip to a movie theater. And I went up to the movie theater counter to order my ticket, and I'm like petrified, thinking she's going to be like, oh my gosh, why are you bald? What's wrong with you? Like all these thoughts. And she's like, oh my gosh, I love your Harry Potter sweatshirt. That moment of validation that it didn't really matter that I was bald. I just could be Sarah. After those 3 months when I was finally discharged, I came out of it and I was like, okay, I don't want to hide anymore. So I ended up coming out on Facebook and sharing that I had trichotillomania and what that meant. And that's actually what launched me into filmmaking, is because I want to show people, because I can tell them about trichotillomania, I can tell them about the effects, but they're not going to understand until they actually see the physical hair loss. And so I created a video, I posted it on YouTube, then I created another video and posted it on YouTube, and then I started making more updates and more updates. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really love telling this story online. And that's what point where my friend was like, I see what you're doing. This is awesome. Let's do pageants.
Beauty queen. You tell the tale so gracefully, even though clearly part of it is a very painful, scary time.
It's one of those things where I recognize that all those challenges, all those days, all those struggles I went through, if I didn't go through that, I would be a very different person today. It did shape me in a very, very positive way.
Absolutely. And, part of those dark times was you felt alone and you felt isolated, like no one could understand. But then by sharing your story, you're kind of paying it forward and say like, look, there are so many people who are going through maybe not the exact same thing necessarily, but something so relatable and similar, and they don't have to feel that loneliness.
It became a mission of mine to really open up the conversation and say, you know what, we're here. We need to start talking about this. And, this was 2015. And so 8 years later, honestly, it is blowing my mind how far we have come in talking about mental health in just that short of time frame. There's obviously a lot more work that needs to be done, but people are starting to accept the idea, okay, this is something we can talk about publicly, which makes my heart very, very happy.
When you kind of spoke about the media representation, the only real representation of pageantry, aside from watching them on TV, is Miss Congeniality for me, which is a very beloved movie. And I hope some of it is reality, but I'm also excited to hear sort of like, what is it really like?
So pageantry, oh gosh, one of the most familiar things that people know about with pageantry is Toddlers and Tiaras. So Toddlers and Tiaras is part of the glitz pageant world. And so glitz pageantry is very heavy makeup, very heavy on the rhinestoning.
Get those cameras away!
There is also natural and scholarship pageants. Scholarship pageants includes like Miss America and like those kinds of pageants, which are very heavily focused on interview.
I'd have to say April 25th because it's not too hot, not too cold.
Going on stage, walking in an evening gown is 100% part of it. Is a fantastic part of it. If you've never done it, highly recommend because you feel like an absolute queen. But what the judges are looking for is, they get to talk to you one-on-one. They get to see how you hold yourself, or how you exude confidence. And what you do is you get a title, and then that title is something that you end up representing for an extended period of time. So say you win Miss Philadelphia. As Miss Philadelphia, then you get to go around the city of Philadelphia, and you get to do events and appearances and talk to people in your community, be active in volunteerism. A lot of pageants do require you to have a platform. So you get to advocate on behalf of your platform. You get to do fundraisers, which is a really, really cool opportunity. And I think that kind of gets muddled in what people's understanding of pageantry is.
It's a scholarship program.
It is not a beauty pageant. It is a scholarship program.
It's about being a person who is a leader and someone who is making a difference and wanting to create good while having this elevated platform that the title gives you.
That's such a fantastic rundown, and sort of like the best, competition is all in good spirits when everyone's working to achieve something that's a significant contribution and helps so many people. That's wonderful. I don't want to grill you too hard about pageants. It's just such a fun world that I'm just not familiar with. Like, I'm coming from healthcare, like
I mean, if
totally.
you have any specific questions, I'm open to it. I think most often I get asked about talent and swimsuit when they're like asking specific questions. So I think what people don't understand is that talent is actually not as common in pageantry as I think it once was, but nowadays there's a lot of pageant systems that it's an optional, so you're not actually required, because I think more and more pageants are realizing that for some people it's not an adequate representation of being talented, being able to showcase something on stage in 90 seconds. I mean, you could be like the top mathematician in the entire world. I don't know how you would show that, and you probably would have to be very creative in showing that in 90 seconds on stage, but that doesn't diminish your talent. It just means you're not a performing arts person, which is totally fine. So I often do ones that don't have talent, and so when people are like, what's your talent? I'm like, well, I didn't do that, but that's cool.
I think that's such a great way to consider abilities and perspectives and how, what's the best way to showcase their strengths. That's a great inclusive practice, I would say. I also want to dip into your filmmaking side too, because Cora, another one of our colleagues, definitely cheers for you and says how you're very humble. And I know it's challenging to toot your own horn. I'm not asking you to do that, but you are a very proficient filmmaker and editor. And I'd love to hear sort of your journey into that and any projects you're excited about or working on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's really interesting because when you list of these are what I do, you tend to think there's filmmaking and then there's disability advocacy, and they kind of stay in their own little corners. The disability advocacy is the reason I got into filmmaking, and most of my passion within the film world kind of does rely on the disability aspect and making those stories more known and talked about and things like that. I was in high school when I realized I wanted to become a filmmaker. So I was looking at various colleges, but I also was, I liked business. I liked a lot of different majors at that time. And so I went to a liberal arts college directly out of high school because I really wasn't like filmmaking is the only path at that point. And so I really wanted a wide variety of options. And so for 2 years at this liberal arts college, that's what I did. And it was perfect. And I wouldn't change my pathway because that's what I needed. I needed to be closer to home. I needed to be able to live on my own for a little bit while still being able to contact parents and medical things and all the fun stuff that comes with being a disabled individual. And after 2 years, I realized that my dreams kind of surpassed what that college was able to teach me. And so I wanted to dive deeper into the world of filmmaking and really get my hands on the technical side and learn kind of Hollywood standards in a way. And so that's when I ended up transferring to the Savannah College of Art and Design, which was, instead of being 2.5 hours from home, it was 12 hours. So it was a good time frame. I was a BFA in film and television with a minor in business, 4.0 when I graduated, which still kind of blows my mind because it was also,
Not bad.
during the pandemic too. So there's that. But it really gave me the opportunity to dive deeper, and I realized that editing was my passion. I loved being able to kind of take all the little pieces that had been filmed and put them together to truly tell the story. We kind of put everything together and make the story flow, which is super fun and super cool.
And not easy. If a fight scene or a dramatic scene is supposed to be cut a certain way and the timing's off or the wrong cuts are used, you've blown it. So that takes a lot of art.
It's definitely a skill of being able to see when you need to just like take it slow and like stay on that shot and just let it breathe, or like quick cuts or any of that number of opportunities that were available when you are editing. I've especially found that documentary was a huge passion of mine, just because I always like telling real people's stories. In documentary, you kind of get to see a rawness that you just don't get in scripted. Out of college, within 6 months, I started working at Space Dream Productions. And so part of that does involve editing, which is really fun. And we actually are working on some documentary stuff, which I won't say too much about, but it is super exciting. And it's like right up my alley, which I don't know that I could have asked for something better. And so I'm excited about that.
That is awesome. I'm excited for you too. It's so funny because you're talking about your experience, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like making videos and sort of telling stories, like that's also something I'm trying to do here. And so I really appreciate your help with this. And I'm so excited to like continue to collaborate with you and the Space Dream team. I mean, you guys have been such a momentum shift for like what me and AJ are trying to do. So I'm just very grateful that we found each other, I guess.
We're truly honored to help you. We love it.
Coming as not a creator, like I mean, I made like videos with my friends in elementary school, but like in no way, like I'm a film consumer. And so turning that around, because I'm also an educator, like it's just so hard to be like, okay, I have all these interests, like how do I put it into a YouTube channel? But I've learned so much from just the disability justice, disability rights movement, and like how they make the movement accessible. So even, you know, beginners like me can kind of, you know, align and put my contribution in. As an advocate, I always like to pick people's brains about what they found particularly challenging, or like what, even though we've made so much progress, like what do you foresee are still some barriers to progress here?
Well, speaking as someone who's in pageantry, I can tell you that the industry is largely inaccessible. That's something that I'm actively working on trying to change. I've been developing a nonprofit called Pageant Inclusion that will train pageant directors and staff and volunteers and like how to be accessible, because most of my experiences, what I found is it's not people necessarily not wanting to be accessible. They genuinely don't even know where to get started or what they need to be doing to include people, and like all types of people, whatever their specific accommodations may be. It's been described as very reactionary instead of being proactive. And I think that is the best way to put it, is when someone comes to a pageant that is, you know, not Miss Wheelchair America and they are a wheelchair user or something equivalent, what I've seen is that it's, oh man, now we got to get a ramp and we got to worry about it. And sometimes they show up at the pageant, they're like, hi, I'm here. And they're like, oh yeah, about that ramp. Yeah. And they're like scrambling to provide ability for someone to be on the stage. And that breaks my heart, because I've spoken to someone who said, I didn't even get to go on stage until the actual competition. Everyone else is practicing on stage, but they didn't put the ramp in yet. So I'm just stuck practicing on the carpet, essentially. And so I'd love for the pageant industry to kind of open its eyes to realize that, you know, 1 in 4 people have a disability here. There is a huge audience of people that you're just not welcoming with open arms, because you're missing out on these key factors of being inclusive.
Absolutely. And everything you're saying, I could apply it right back to like medicine and healthcare. Like I've been to annual meetings and sort of like presentations where the stage wasn't wheelchair accessible. People have had to be lifted up. And one of the speakers that was invited was a wheelchair user. And yet they didn't think to let him access the stage. It was kind of baffling. But on the other hand, I have seen it done. So I don't want to discourage people from, you know, making that change and shifting that mindset to, okay, this can be standard and this is not a problem. This is not a burden. Like you're just making it more equitable and accessible.
That's the biggest thing, is it's not a burden. And honestly, what I found is in a lot of things with disability accessibility aren't actually hard. It is that mental change of just making sure you're including them in the planning process. This is just something to do. Within your other 50 million to-dos, like adding one to-do is not like going to have your world combust. It's just a different thing to do.
If anything, it increases the reach of who can attend your event, and that, you know, you're including an additional 25% more people with simple considerations like that. A colleague of mine recently shared with me, and I think I'm a little late on the bandwagon because it's from 2021. It's called a Disability Justice Audit Tool by Leah Lakshmi. I can't pronounce her full name. I'm so sorry, but but I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's like a disability justice advocate and author. She also wrote this book called Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, which is like absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend. But it's basically like a handbook, like, hey, you're trying to make your event more accessible. Like some of it's a checklist, some of it's just kind of discussion and ideas. But I love that resource. And I like, the minute I got it, I just like sent it to everybody I knew, including you.
Yeah, I got to look at it a little bit before the call, and it's really cool. And there is something, it's not like the same thing, but there's the accessibility scorecard, which was created for film festivals specifically, and so that attendees can fill it out. It's a way to give anonymous feedback to the festivals about where they currently stand in their accessibility practices, which is really cool because I think a lot of people's worry is that if they're like the one person attending who is like a wheelchair user or someone who's deaf, and like you go to them and say, I have this experience and it wasn't great, they're going to kind of put you as the single problem person. But rather, if you have a scorecard where a bunch of people are filling it out and giving their feedback on it, then it's not singling anyone's experience out, but rather a whole community is saying, here's what we saw, here's what we didn't see, here's what we'd like to see, which is really cool. And I love seeing more resources like this popping up. It's an education thing, it's an awareness thing for people to say, oh, this is something I need to be thinking about. Okay, here we go.
That sounds like such a valuable tool. Could you send that to me? I would love to sort of adapt it maybe. Again,
Absolutely.
I'm always thinking about healthcare settings and like the education setting, the classroom, and also just like a clinic space or a hospital space. We kind of need that checklist, really. Healthcare loves checklists because that's how you don't miss anything. And it's data that helps administrators, facilities managers in any industry. So please share that with me.
Yeah, shout out to Forward Doc, the Filmmakers with Disabilities group. So they're fantastic. I'm a part of it. Cora's a part of it, and it's a great group of people who are trying to make a change within the film industry to make it more accessible.
That is awesome. Yes, more of that, please. If you want to have more conversations like this, hit that like button and subscribe to Disability Clinic for more accessible and inclusive education. Until next time, thank you for watching, listening, and learning.